Coming up on 9:16 here on the morning show with Jeff and Will on AM 1700 WRCR. Have a straw, WRCR.com. Welcome back to the show, everybody, and welcome into Tina Traster from RCBizJournal.com. Good morning, Tina.
Good morning, everybody, on this gorgeous day.
It is.
Gorgeous day, gorgeous weekend, gorgeous week ahead. All good. As we all bite our nails and await the decision to come down from the appellate court on George Holman and whether or not he will be running for Clarkstown, because apparently that's what everybody wants to know.
I was actually glad you brought that up, because it appears that he was telling us earlier in the week, last week, that he was expecting a decision by Thursday or Friday. Apparently, that decision has not come down. Is that correct?
The decision is due today, which is the 15th, and as of 3 minutes ago, it still had not come down. Here's what we know. And I think it's worth the public understanding a bit about this. And I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to do my best to explain some things. But here's what we know. We know that the appellate judges reversed Justice Paul Marks's order that had tossed Scott Ugel's petition to run for Clarkstown town supervisor. When that the hearing made its rounds in the community, people were rather I guess surprised and shocked at how that hearing those oral arguments had gone down, and there was a lot of buzz and what have you. But in the end of the day, Justice Marks had said that Ugel was ineligible to run because he was a sitting judge in Clarkstown, and essentially the appellate court disagreed with that. They did say that he could run for town supervisor while a sitting judge, and that there's nothing in the law that specifically made him ineligible. However, that is in contrast with the ethics rules that govern judges that preclude them from electioneering while on the bench. So I don't know how we square that, those two contradictory things. And also, and I think this is more important from a legal point of view, so whether or not Ugel and Garvey's petition reeked of or smelled of fraud, in the end of the day, the appellate court also felt that it wasn't argued enough, there weren't enough witnesses to prove that fraud. And so all around, that decision got tossed, and what we're potentially looking at is right now Garvey potentially on the ballot, but we all know that he was always a placeholder to wait and see if George Holman was going to prevail. Now, let's talk about that, because that's really the issue that everybody's... Unless you have any questions, I'll move on.
Do you think? Well, let me ask you, because you're talking about him being a placeholder. If George Holman is not the candidate, is Mr. Harvey going to be, or Mr. Garvey going to be the candidate?
It appears that way, although he seems to be a rather busy man. What with his full-time law practice,
right,
chairman of the Republican Party, not to mention the fact that he pulls down a salary from Rockland Green for 20 hours a week. So his work week must have a million hours for him to do all of those things. But he, unless the judges reverse Judge Amy Puerto's 3 decisions, I think that's who we're going to see on the ballot. I don't know what that means for all of his other positions and how he could possibly end up as the full-time supervisor and be all of those other things. But we'll keep an eye on that. So here's what the appellate judges have to think about. This is what they're pondering. Okay, and they really don't and haven't had enough time to really unpack this issue, because this became an election case. And I think that's unfortunate, because they're dealing with something that's going to affect a lot of law and precedent into the future. What they're picking around is whether or not the term limits law, whether this was an issue that was procedural or substantive. Now, without having to go into Law School 101, Procedural would be things that have to do with the mechanics of passing a law. So let's say the number of days, the publication of that law, and a referendum. Homan has argued, or his lawyer, Spolzino, and now that name is important, Spolzino has argued all along that the law was never actually passed because there was never a referendum, which the law would have required in the first place. So that's procedural. Substantive is something that's fatally defective, unconstitutional, affects the nature of the law. And it's not a hardcore thing. But speaking of hardcore, they say that if something is substantively defective, it's like pornography. You'll know it when you see it, right? So Puerto had rested on that there had been that it was procedural, and that allowed her to invoke to agree that the statute of limitations had run out, and that the term limits law was going to hold. But if the appellate judges should believe that this was a substantive failure, then that gives them, I guess, the route or the passage to overturn Amy Puerto's 3 decisions, and that gives George Homan a passage to get on the ballot and run, in which case we probably won't be talking about Lawrence Garvey anymore, at least not in that capacity. Now, the failure to have a referendum, the question is, was it substantive or was it procedural? And, one of the weird, strange twists in this case, not to get too much into the weeds here. Oh, and weeds. Put a pin in that, because we're going to finish up by talking about cannabis. But the judges were looking at a precedent that was actually set in a case called Islandia, which in fact was an opinion written by Spolzino, who is in fact the attorney for George Homan. So if the appellate court decides to overturn Puerto's decisions on this, they will be really they'll be overturning their own precedent and setting new precedent. And so I think that people who have an interest in legal affairs are watching this pretty closely, not just because of whether or not Homan ends up after all of this aggravation on the ballot or not, but whether a precedent that was was going to be overturned, and whether the term limits of Clarkstown for 8 years is going to become now suddenly null and void. So there are a lot of issues here that are much bigger than whether or not George runs again. So this decision is going to come down today because it's the deadline, and we will have that story up as soon as we can humanly pound it out.
And real quick, if George Homan loses this time, what happens to him next? Can he appeal again somewhere, or does he have to face the facts?
No. This is the end of the road for him. If he loses this, it's the end of the road. He will probably. This is just a prediction. I've heard some chatter about him landing at the county parks department. I don't know if that's true or not. I assume he just based on the way things work in this county, he'll land somewhere for a couple of years. And then I don't know. Maybe he'll come back for another run in 2 years. It's hard to say, but I have this suspicion that he will remain some sort of a public face here in the county. Just a suspicion. We shall see. If we have no more questions on this, I'm just going to quickly.
Yeah, go ahead. What about cannabis? We're very interested in that.
Well, okay. So there's so much going on there, and I want to mention that we have a newsletter that's called Marijuana Mondays, and we're putting out all of the updated information on the cannabis market every single Monday. But today we had a full-on story because new licenses have finally come down for the Hudson Valley for the Hudson Valley. A total of 16 have been approved. Now, we know that there are 2 people from Nyack who have been approved, although we don't know whether they will open up shop in Nyack or somewhere else in the Hudson Valley. So we're waiting to see, what that's going to look like. In total, the Mid-Hudson region, which includes Ulster, Rockland Green, Columbia, Dutchess, Putnam, Orange, and Westchester counties, will have a total of 34 licensed retail dispensaries. You may remember that here in this county, almost all the towns and some of the villages opted out, and we were left with just really a handful of villages here that did not opt out. So it remains to be seen like where the cannabis deserts are, and it very well could be throughout this county. All of that said, to put it in some context, the cannabis, the legal cannabis market is being paled and disadvantaged by the burgeoning underground market. And this is unfortunate, and this really requires law enforcement to get on it, because according to the Wall Street Journal, there's almost 1,500 bodegas, smoke shops, and convenience shops that are selling unregulated, untaxed cannabis in New York City. And this is problematic in terms of leveling the field as a legal industry, getting the industry off the ground, not to mention the fact that many of these products that are being tested have harmful contaminants. And, that just undermines all the good work that's been done to bring this industry, into a legal, viable, and economically, interesting industry.
But obviously the work was incomplete because they didn't foresee that this kind of, or they thought they didn't foresee this kind of thing happening.
I know. I agree with that. I think that it's hard to understand why something like this is not being legally enforced. This is not that difficult to kind of crack down on. And I know, we moved in the direction of, okay, we're excited about legalizing marijuana, and we're catching up to other states where they've done this successfully, but they're undermining the whole industry by allowing this underground market it's really muddied the waters. And
I thought the whole point of legalizing it was so you can get rid of the underground back out channel sales of it.
Yeah, and I think we write a really thoughtful piece, so people should take a look at it, because we really lay this out. But it really boils down to law enforcement. I mean, this is going to be something that has to be cracked down on, and it's not a setback to crack down on this where it's being done illegally. It's an enhancement to allow the legal side of the industry to move forward, efficiently. So there's that. I also wanted to mention that we're going to have our next Meet the Editor breakfast. We had our last one a couple of weeks ago. It was very successful, and we're going to have the next one again at Roasted. That's Roasted with an apostrophe D in Nanuet on June 7th at 8:30 in the morning.
Thank you, Tina. And for more information about any of that and for some of these stories and the one that we expect hot off the presses any moment now, go to rcbizjournal.com. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you again on Monday.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye. And just a reminder, stay away from the Palisades Parkway. It is shut down between heading southbound between exits. It looks like 13 and 10, that due to a car fire and accident earlier this morning. Stay away from there. You're not going to want to get on the Palisades at all. Thank you very much.